really do appreciate the chance to be here. You are looking at somebody who's mad. To put your paw up a second time really does, I think, indicate masochistic tendencies. But it is true. I have said that I will make myself available if the New South Wales National Party feels that I can make a contribution based on long experience and a conviction I have that revolving door leadership has meant that there's a lack of continuity and corporate knowledge that I think is vital to taking the nation forward in the most dangerous times for this country and its freedoms since the late 1930s. So this, of course, produces different reactions, I have to say. Those who think it's an appalling idea and those who think it's not such a bad idea. Julia and I have just had a few days up at Noosa. We went up there for a birthday party of a very good friend on Saturday nights. We went to church on Sunday. As your Archbishop said, not a bad idea going to church. And I said, more people should try it in this secular age. But talking afterwards to two very, I think I would say, distinguished Queenslanders, both of them wonderfully dignified men, not young, but one ramrod straight gentleman of about 80, he told me that. I didn't ask and I didn't assume. But we'd had 10 minutes of conversation about his very interesting life when his good friend approached. And he was about the same age. You could tell a very vitally interested and interesting man from the expression on his face and his moving eyes. And we were introduced. And my conversationalist looked at me and he said, I hope you don't mind me saying it, you do look vaguely like John Anderson. And the other fella, Eddie, said, straight off the top of his hat, John Anderson, he's only 64, he's got a lot of energy, he's running again for the Senate. I think that might be a good thing. And the fella standing right in front of me said, you do really look quite like him. What did you say your name was again? And I said, John Anderson. And they both said, not the one we're talking about. And I said, I'm really sorry to have to disappoint you, but the answer is yes. Anyway, it was great to meet them. One of the great thinkers of the last century was G.K. Chesterton. And many of you will have known of his writings, and perhaps you even belong to the G.K. Chesterton Foundation. I'm on their mailing list. There are a lot of people who still celebrate the extraordinary input that he had as a great Catholic thinker, theologian and writer. Remarkable man. One, I have to say, with a tremendous sense of humour. And he knew the great art of disagreeing well, something we have lost in our culture. Because I think the greatest single threat to Australia's future, in many ways, is our inability to communicate properly and respectfully and engage in high-quality debate. You cannot get good public policy out of a bad, a truncated or a shut-down debate. The last time we had a really high-quality, if robust, debate conducted essentially by two men, John Howard and Kim Beazley, who behaved in a civilised way despite their vehement disagreement on a new tax system, was in fact the new tax system of 2000. Can anyone nominate a major reform since then? And yet we face now a plethora of horrendously difficult issues that require policy responses of similar magnitude. But no, we'd rather just go back to sleep on the big policy issues and return to the main battle, which is tearing one another apart. But G.K. Chesterton and George Bernard Shaw disagreed on everything, but remained steadfast friends. One, a great theologian and writer, the other, a great atheist and playwright. Story goes that G.K. was 6'4" or 5 in the old language and gargantuan. He was huge. George Bernard Shaw was a slip of a man, quite slightly built. They teamed up in London, having not seen one another for a little while. And G.K. looked at George and said, by George, you look like there's a famine in Britain. To which George Bernard replied, quick as a flash, and G.K., you look like you're the cause of it. Now, many of you will know of some of the wise insights, fact is stranger than fiction, for example, that he was behind. Many of you will have heard of the story the Times ran the best letters page in the world in the 1920s. And they opened a competition, write in and tell us what is wrong with our troubled world. Why does it keep going wrong? And Chesterton flattened them. Dear sir, in response to your question, next paragraph, I am. Yours sincerely, G.K. Chesterton. He got it, didn't he? He got that our problem is our tendency to look after ourselves, and that has now morphed into full-scale radical individualism. It's all about me. And that in turn has morphed into identity politics, which is now tearing us apart. The eminent historian and economist Neil Ferguson is with George Bernard Shaw on matters of faith, but says Christianity made the West great and the loss of Christianity is leading to its decline. Neil Ferguson told me in a conversation that I recorded, you can find it on the internet at johnanderson.net.au. I'm not here to advertise, but you will find it there. And I asked him, what in your view are the three great threats to Western freedom and prosperity today? And he said, in ascending order, Islamic extremism, followed by number 2, the real chance of misadventure, miscalculation between the rising superpower and the old superpower. But the greatest threat of all is the loss of our own history and the abandonment of belief in our own culture. I think he's onto something. It has now reached plague proportions. The move to strip down statues from days gone by is one pointer. We are determined to deconstruct our own history, and the most extraordinary claims are aired and absorbed because no one knows that history. The attempt to move Australia Day was described by Frank Ferrudi from England, who comes to this country quite often, and he is a man well to the left of the centre and not terribly sympathetic, although respectful of Christianity. I think that would be a fair summation. He's a friend, I don't want to misrepresent him. But he wrote in The Australian that the attempt to redescribe Australia Day and to move a date is part of a global movement to delegitimise our past so that our young people feel that they have inherited a culture that is without merit, that is bad, that ought to be overthrown, that is incapable of progress, as though no one who has gone before us possessed any wisdom or any insights, that we can neither learn from the good things they did because they didn't do anything, nor can we learn from the bad things that they did. It is a rejection of our past in order that people might feel inclined to want to overthrow where we're at. The greatest defender of freedom in last century, there were many fascinating figures. G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, marvellous writers and thinkers. George Orwell. We should all read 1984 again. Really, shouldn't we? But then there was the greatest defender of freedom, without whom none of us would be enjoying lunch together today, Churchill. He wrote in 1933 that any culture that does not pass on to its children the story of that culture, its heroes, its religious belief, he wrote, is in effect saying that that culture is null and void and without merit, thus leaving young people, his words not mine, directionless, without purpose and meaning in life, and open to Karl Marx's dictum that a people detached from their history are easily persuaded. Now, as somebody who is always genuinely keen to encourage young people and doesn't want to sound for a moment as though I'm condemning youth, can I say to you, if there's a remarkable feature about a lot of young people today in the social media-driven age, one of the most remarkable features is the rapidness with which they pick up causes and then move on to the next one, in a way that reflects the fact that they are detached from their cultural roots. They don't understand them, they don't value them. This is now finding, of course, its ultimate expression in critical theory. Critical theory sort of, if you like, grown out of postmodernism, which lost its momentum, probably for pretty good reason. It's fairly despairing and intellectually shallow stuff. But it's important to remember that postmodernism and now critical theory reject, in very blunt terms, all of the world's major religions, all of the major political thought structures, including the very Marxism, which probably, more than anything else, gave rise to those philosophies. It rejects modern thought, the Enlightenment, and science. And you'll see that the term social construct, rather than biological reality, for example, now determines a great deal of the thinking of young people in an age when science has been so discredited. So critical theory has taken over to an extraordinary degree. And you'll be aware of it if you stop and think about it. The idea that we are endemically racist, that everything is about race. But a true critical theorist, and the Black Lives Matter motivators, the actual organisation, are critical theorists, will believe that it's only whites who can be racist. And when you press them for evidence, they will argue that the numbers show it because whites predominate in so many professional and privileged positions. That is the proof, essentially, as they put it, as I understand it to be. As a way of illustrating, because I abhor racism, as I abhor violence, both to me are deeply offensive because they fly in the face of everything that I think matters as a Christian believer. But they fly in the face of a man who, for all of the rough edges, and there were plenty, that I respect hugely, Martin Luther King. Remember those thundering words, "I look forward to the day when my children are judged by the content of their character, not the colour of their skin." That's been turned on its head. Everything now is about the colour of your skin again. And then you come to the whole debate over gender, and I need hardly dwell on it, except to say to you that this stuff now is rampant and everywhere. And of course, it produces utter absurdities like the defund the police movement because the police are inherently racist. I simply make the observation that anybody who cares to inquire at all in America will find that the person most likely to call an emergency police number in America is a young black female. The person who has the most to lose from defunding police services and their capacity to respond quickly to violence are the very people that I thought were supposed to be the victims. The other remarkable element about this movement is that it can never allow for progress. Plainly, there are real issues to be addressed in that country, America. Let's stay away from Australia for the purposes of this exercise, in terms of inherent racism and rising above those things. But I make this point. At the time that MLK, Martin Luther King, was so wonderfully pursuing that civil rights movement, 30% of black Americans had middle-class incomes. Today, it is 60%. What does that tell you? Progress is being made. You see, this is one of the most remarkable things about our liberal democratic order. It can be self-correcting. But if we break it down, we will lose that mechanism to talk honestly and openly and to address real issues. And that is the danger that we are now in. This, of course, is directly relevant for those of us who are feeling that the real contribution, the loving your neighbour approach that the churches have taken down through the ages is now being not just diminished but turned against us. Over my lifetime, we've gone from a situation where even if you didn't go to church, you thought Christianity was broadly true. Then it became just one of many truths. Now it's dangerous and you shouldn't expose your children to it, and it may even be not just hurtful but harmful. And whole slabs of Christian teaching should not be brought to the attention of our children. You can see that coming through very clearly in anti-Christian, and I'll call it that, legislation or pushes for it right round the Western world today. It ignores extraordinary realities. The record of the Catholic Church in opposing slavery from the very early days of the Church is actually a very proud story. And show me other cultural forces, other cultures that had as one of their clear objectives the ending of slavery. Then, of course, there was the whole movement against slavery that was led by William Wilberforce at about the time this country was settled. It was extraordinary, and its history is well worth reading. And a couple of major questions arise out of it. What was it that so motivated William Wilberforce, a man born into immense privilege, a fortune in today's language of probably $500 million Australian, went to Oxford, was seen as a future Prime Minister, entered the Parliament at the age of 22 or 23, that so turned his life upside down that he made it his life objectives to end slavery and end corruption. He used quaint language to describe it in Great Britain, and to reform the way the British behaved in Asia, India in particular, as his life worked. It was to cost him his reputation, it was to cost him his friends, his place in society. He died a pauper. What was it that so changed his life? Well, of course, it was the power of the gospel. He went off on a trip around Europe with a remarkable man, Isaac Milner, the most brilliant mathematician of the day. They say that William Wilberforce was a very slight little man, and Milner was the size of G.K. Chesterton, so they travelled around Europe in a little sulky which was on a 45-degree angle, arguing about Christian truth, and Wilberforce was soundly convinced it was true, and he put everything that he stood to gain by on the table, sacrificed it, and succeeded, with many friends, in ending the slave trade. Was that racist? Is that a blight on the Church's history? Or is it a wonderful story of deep commitment, loving commitment to your neighbour, and to freedom, and to opportunity for all? And you know, the British government then, when they finally abolished, it was a two-step process. They abolished the trade in 1807, slavery itself in 1833. The British government got behind it. They put the Royal Navy into action to stop other countries trading in human beings. Were the 17,000 Royal Navy personnel who died seeking to rescue poor Africans caught in that terrible trade, were they racist too? Do you see what I'm driving at? This idea that you cannot learn from the good and the bad in our own history is devastating for us. And so we come to Australia now. The lack of understanding, the lack of civility, the lack of respect, the lack of commitment to one another in the public discourse today means that we are all losing at this very dangerous time for the nation. It's often attributed to Voltaire, the old saying, "I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it," was actually Voltaire's biographer, an American woman as recently as the 1930s, who attributed those sentiments to him. But if you stop and think about it, what it encapsulates is that the idea that I may disagree so vehemently with your idea that I don't want to hear it, but it doesn't matter because it's the idea that's the issue, it's not you. I must respect you as having every right to put your views on the table. But that's not the way we now work. Having rejected the idea of loving cooperation, give and take, even tolerance, the much touted virtue which seems to have disappeared off the table in recent years, I never thought it was a great virtue. A virtue, yes, but not a great one. How much more powerful is love of neighbour than tolerance of neighbour? How much more powerful is it to say, let me help out of love, than I'll just tolerate you if I must? But we've now moved to a point where that's been forgotten as well, and what we've done, stop and think about this for a moment, is set up the most appalling architecture, machinery if you like, starting right back in the 1970s, of discrimination legislation around the country. To do what? Establish my rights regardless of their impact on others. It's amazing stuff. competing human rights. Do you see the illogicality in it? And so we were promised by the Prime Minister at the time that religious freedom was more important than same-sex marriage. How many years on? And the legislation hasn't really seen the light of day. I find this amazing and deeply troubling. And it's important for churches and families and those who run schools and mercy operations and health outreach services in all sorts of ways. And let me point to a monstrous hypocrisy in the middle of this. A Labor government that I had some respect for, I respected its leader at the time, in Victoria passed some quite extensive anti-discrimination legislation. And you know what they did? They excused political parties from all of its provisions on the basis that a politician should not have, or a political party should not have to employ somebody who disagreed with their creed. Now that'd be a neat thing just to lift out and put into a federal act, wouldn't it? So that churches could go about the business of loving their neighbour and of being true to the things that they believe in and exercising the right to pass it on to their children and to their communities. Because no one has written, for all of our failings and all of our faults, a better book on human dignity and human flourishing and human opportunity than the Christians down through the ages who have truly stepped out to love their neighbours. Let me then conclude a couple of action points. Can I say to you, first and foremost, we are in grave danger from internal and external forces. Every one of us now, every one of us, must ask not so much what would I like to do, how would I like to spend my life, what can I do with my resources, how can I wind out my retirement and enjoy it? We must ask first, what can I do? What should I seek to do? How can I offer to serve? The second thing that I would say is we need to team together in realistic ways. A remarkable man, in the 19 years I had in the Parliament, the best speaker we had at the annual breakfast was a man called Charles Coulson. Coulson was an ugly brute of a man, an ex-US Marine, and he was Nixon's hatchet man, and he went to jail for his role in Watergate, where he became, like Wilberforce in different circumstances, deeply converted to Christian faith. And one of the interesting observations he made is that in the face of aggressive, ugly secularism, secularism, by the way, should not be ugly, but its proponents have turned it into something ugly. Go back and have a look at the root meanings of the word. It's not anti-religious at all. It just recognises the two spheres, the godly and the worldly. And it doesn't for a moment imply that they shouldn't interact richly and properly and appropriately with each other. But he made the point that in some of these attacks we need to be co-belligerents. And one of the great and deep joys of Julia's life and mine in recent times has been interacting, and I can think of three of them, I was thinking in the car coming down, with three absolutely remarkable young men from the Catholic tradition that we know that have really stepped up in their faith and want to make a difference. And how wonderful it is to see them working with other people of like minds from different and similar traditions to put a stake in the ground and say no further. Freedom matters. Respect and dignity for one another lies at the heart of the Western tradition. The rule of law, as Teddy Roosevelt, not Franklin, put it, is such that no one should be above the law and no one should be below it. No one. No one. And we need to re-establish and fight for those principles because the identity politics that has taken over is leading us into a world where we divide ourselves into good and bad people. We lose sight of the essential problem that every one of us should face, which is that weakness and failing crosses every human heart. The dividing line is not between one group of people and another, as identity politics would have us believe, a situation in which tribalised people slog it out to the death and ignore the broader interests. And that is everywhere in Australia. We now look like a society where men and women are at war with each other, where the races are at war with each other, and where the generations are at war with each other. And that is not to say for a moment that there aren't real issues in all three areas, but you won't resolve them with a war. George war, always better than war, as Churchill put it. Finally, can I conclude on this point? each of us needs to check our own heart. Are we secure in our own hope? Have we thought through, as Jordan Peterson put it, every one of us, before we go out to solve the world's problems, needs to self-examine. We need to lock ourselves in the bedroom, to use his language, and be honest with ourselves and recognise none of us are who we think and know we ought to try to be. And in some ways, as he put it, and I think he's right, the more we look and the more honest we are, the further short we may fall. And he would say, sort yourself out and go back out into the world and then be the most noble person you can. I would say integral to sorting out yourself is understanding that Christ's grace is sufficient.